you so much. Thanks, Nancy, and your family. What a great history. My gosh, it's so wonderful to have these independent bookstores still going, even though they've been reduced significantly in numbers. But keep supporting this bookstore, yes? Yes. It's great to have all of you here. And I'd like to dedicate this evening to the indigenous people of the world. We've just experienced another horrible tragedy in Honduras with Berta Cáceres being assassinated, being murdered for her activist role against big hydroelectric projects and essentially the taking over of the lands, the indigenous lands there. It's an old story, and it's been happening a lot in Ecuador and Guatemala and Peru, Bolivia, places where I go. Don't usually make the news. She made the news because she won the Goldman Environmental Award and also was very well known in the world. But this is just an incredible, sad experience and something I'm going to talk a little bit more about. But I just want to dedicate this evening to this. And I also want to thank my Ganyaki friends from the Ganyaki Nation, the Mohawk Nation up near Plattsburgh, who drove for 6 hours just to come to this event and are driving back tonight. And their word is Gwe Gwe, which means hi, hello, how are you? So let's all, so would you guys stand up, please? Gwe Gwe. Everybody, Gwe Gwe. They're having a struggle. They've got. I've spent time at their place up there. Beautiful, beautiful farmlands, all organic. They can their own foods. They have their own hydroelectric plant. They're a totally independent nation, and the state of New York is giving them a lot of problems right now. So I'll do some great support to you and to all the indigenous people of the world. And when you come right down to it, we're all indigenous. You know, every one of us. Anyway, Gwe Gwe. Gwe Gwe, come on, Gwe Gwe. Gwe Gwe. Gwe Gwe. Louder, Gwe Gwe. All right, thank you. So I think my being here begs the question, why would I write the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman 12 years after the original Confessions of an Economic Hitman was written? And I think I can boil that down to really two main reasons. One is that things have gotten so much worse. The economic hitman system has spread from the developing countries, which is where I practiced it, to the United States and Europe and the rest of the world in the last 12 years, really. And it's created a global failed economic system, something I call a death economy. It's based on debt, fear, militarization, and the destruction of the Earth's resources. It's something we must change. And that leads to the second point, in that there's a consciousness revolution around the world. So we're all here tonight, and in the last 12 years, I've been on pretty much a constant globe-trotting speaking tour. In the last 3 months, I've been home for about 2.5 weeks. But that goes on for the last 10 years. I've been all over the world, and everywhere I go, people are waking up like you to the fact that we live on a very fragile space station, and it's got no shuttles. You can't get off. I can't get off. My 8-year-old grandson, Grant, won't be able to get off. And maybe a few people will go to Mars and never come back. Imagine that. Yeah, I'll sign up. Maybe a few people will go to the moon. But most of us will never get off, and we don't want to get off. It's a beautiful planet, you know, we need to take care of it. So these two things have come together in the last 12 years. The digging in of the economic hitman system, the spreading of it to our own country and the whole world, which is new. And at the same time, a tremendous awakening. And a realization that we must do it. That this whole system is run by big corporations, not by governments, big corporations that control governments. And I think, to me, I was just spent an hour and a half with Amy Goodman, Democracy Now! How many of you have heard of Amy Goodman? Wow, all right. So we did, after her show this morning, we did a special together for an hour and a half that's going to be shown sometime, who knows when. But anyway, and you know, it just struck by talking about this system that we have that just isn't working, and we all know it, and we know that during these presidential elections, what we're seeing is that the President of the United States may have symbolic value, but when you come right down to it, the President doesn't have a lot of real power. The power is in the big corporations. You know, I used to say, well, one of the few powers the President has is to appoint Supreme Court justices. That's being strongly questioned now, whether he even has those powers. But the good news is we, the people, have the power, and I'm going to get into that more in a moment. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about how do we change a failed system? How does that happen? And I'd like to just relate a little personal experience. And I see some familiar faces that may have heard this story before, so stick with it. But because I think this illustrates a bit about how we change things. So back when I graduated from business school, back shortly after the Civil War, yeah, I'm going to try to make this a little funny tonight, because this is a really, really serious conversation. So as a kid, I learned from Shakespeare that if you're going to talk about serious things, you better throw in a few jokes, you know, and make people laugh a little bit. So feel free to laugh. But so back when I graduated from business school in the late 60s, I joined the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps sent me, they sent me to training for 8 weeks to learn Spanish, which if any of you speak a second language, you know 8 weeks is not a lot of time to learn another language, and to learn to be a credit and savings co-op specialist, because I graduated from business school. Then they sent me deep, deep into the Amazon to live with the Shuar. Now, how many of you have ever seen a shrunken head or a picture of one? So the Shuar did it. You know, they're the only people that do that. This is real hunters and gatherers, and I'm being sent in there to, well, first of all, as I'm walking into the jungle, I'm on a 2-day walk, road into the jungle, and people are walking out, and I'm trying to practice my lousy Spanish on these people, and to my chagrin, discover my Spanish is better than theirs. They speak Shuar. So first experience with government work is the US government teaches you a language, sends you to someplace where nobody speaks the language. So then I finally get there. There's one guy that I can communicate with. He's the school teacher from up in the Andes. He speaks Spanish, and I say to him, so I'm here to help you guys form your credit and savings co-ops. He looks at me like, yeah, credit and savings? You know, we don't have any money. It's all barter. Your bananas or my papayas. So very quickly, I understood that I really didn't have much to offer these people. All my years of education just didn't hold water there. And then I got very, very sick. I lost a tremendous amount of weight, maybe 20 pounds, with no scales, in a real short period of time. I was dying. It's a 2-day walk out of the jungle through dense jungle, and then another 2-day ride in a rickety old wooden bus up through the mountains. There's no way I can do this. So I'm resigned to dying. Late one afternoon, the school teacher comes up to me, and he's leading this decrepit-looking, very tiny old man by the hand, a Shuar man. And he says, this guy's the shaman. And I'm like, well, what's that? I grew up in New Hampshire. I don't know, what's a shaman? You know, this is 1968. He says, well, he could heal you. And that got my attention. So this shaman, this old man, he backs off a bit, and he looks at my feet, looks at my head, scans my body, and he steps up real close to me. He's very, very short. And he steps up, and he wags his finger at my face, and he says, you're dying. And that's good, because the Shuar believe in reincarnation. And he figured my life is just about as bad as it could get, you know. I'm talking about forming credit and savings co-ops to people that can't form credit and savings co-ops. They don't know how to shoot a blowgun. I don't know how to track a jaguar. It's time to move on. Time to become a jaguar or an anaconda or an ayahuasca plant or something or other. Get on with it, guy, you know. And at this point, I think I started crying. And he says, well, shit, you know, maybe you're not ready. In which case I could cure you tonight. So I said, I think I'll take that. And he did. So that night, he took me on a classic shamanic journey. And, you know, there was no conversation here. We didn't share a language, but there was a lot of music and some interesting plants involved. And on this journey, I saw that growing up, I come from like 300 years of Yankee Calvinists in New Hampshire and Vermont. And we ate very bland foods. No onions, no garlic, you know, just meat and potatoes, basically. I was taught to wash my hands all the time, very hygienic. Now suddenly I'm living with the Shuar, and they've never seen a bar of soap. And there's a few of you, so how many of you have been with the Shuar, the Achua? I see some familiar faces out there. We have 3 or 4, okay, great. So you know what I'm talking about. And the foods. So in the Amazon, you just don't drink water. Nobody drinks water in the Amazon because the rivers are filled with organic matter. And so they drink a kind of beer. It's called chicha, and it's made from the women chewing and spitting the manioc root, and it ferments, and then you can pour water in it because the alcohol kills whatever's there, and you drink this beer. Well, I was drinking a lot of spit beer because you got to rehydrate in the Amazon, and no matter where I looked, I couldn't find any Perrier water. And I was eating a lot of these foods, so there's all kinds of weird foods. One of the favorites is squirming white grubs you pull out of a rotten log and down the hatch, you know. And I won't tell you the really interesting ones. I was eating a lot of these things because no matter where I looked, I couldn't find any Cliff Bars. They hadn't even been invented then, you know. But on this shamanic journey, what I saw was every time I ate these foods or drank this chicha, there was a voice over my shoulder saying, son, it'll kill you. At the same time, I saw that the Shuar are really healthy people. And the Achua that you guys were with, the men are all built like Tarzan. They're hunters. And the women, well, I was in my early 20s, the women were looking really good. And people live to be very old if they die in a dugout canoe tipping over on them or a snake bites them or something. And so what I realized that night was that it wasn't the food or the drink that was killing me. It was a mindset. It was my consciousness. And after that night, I was totally healthy. And a few days later, the shaman came up to me and he said, I cured you. You owe me. And his demand was that I become his apprentice. I had no interest in becoming a shaman's apprentice in 1960. I had graduated from business school, never even heard of a shaman. There was no future in shamanism. There is now. But he saved my life. So I did it, you know, and later I studied with shamans in many other parts of the world. And one of the things that I learned that's so important from shamanism is that there's, and now we've got scientists talking about this, but there's really 2 realities. There's the objective reality, this microphone. And then there's a reality that guides human societies. It's the strongest force amongst human societies, and probably we're the only living creatures, as far as we know, that even understand this reality, or certainly that guides us. And that's something I call, it's an imagined or perceived reality. So microphone, objective reality. What I'm talking about is a perceived reality. If you think about it, culture is totally perceived. Corporations are perceived. Borders are perceived. There is no Canada, United States, Mexico. There is a Ganyaki nation, the Mohawk nation, but we really don't have borders. We just perceive them. And that's exactly the battle the Mohawks are fighting now, is to say, these are our lands, and you've just defined them as differently. These are perceived realities that we codify into law, and they have a huge impact then on the objective realities. But it's also the secret for changing. The secret for getting us out of this death economy is simply changing our perceived reality. And if you look at every time in history when there's been major change, And it's happened quickly. It's been because there's been a quick change of perceived reality. One example, 1773, almost everybody in America believed that the British Army was invincible. The most powerful army in the world. There's no way a bunch of hunters and farmers could stand up to this army. But that was the perceived reality. George Washington had seen a major defeat of the British, 1,400 British by about 300 Indians and French at the Battle of the Monongahela. He knew that the British were very vulnerable. All he had to do was stand behind trees and watch them march by in their bright red target coats. And Tom Paine and Thomas Jefferson and a number of other writers inspired a nation in a very short period of time to change that perceived reality and say the British are very invincible. We can take them on. We can win our independence. And it happened. We can go on and on. Any major change that you look at in history is an alteration. It's always when we choose a more appealing, a better, a stronger, a more attractive perceived reality. And so today we have a perceived reality of a death economy. And how did we get there? I mean, before I get into the death economy itself, I want to talk a little bit about what I did as an economic hitman, because that's really how we got here. So my job, and as Nancy said, I think that my title was chief economist at this major consulting firm in Boston. But my job was to identify countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. The money, however, would not go to the country. It would go to our own corporations who would make huge profits out of building power plants, industrial parks, other big infrastructure projects that would benefit a few wealthy families in that country who own the industries and the commercial establishments. But the majority of the people would suffer terribly as a result, because money would be diverted from education, healthcare, and other social services to pay interest on the debt. In the end, the principal on the debt was never bought down. We'd go back into the country and say, since you can't pay your debt, sell your resource, oil or whatever, real cheap to our corporations without any environmental restrictions or social regulations. Privatize. Sell your electric utilities, your water and sewage system, your schools, your jails, all your public sector businesses to our corporations. That way we really corporatize the world, this increase of this empire, corporate empire. And in the few cases where we failed, economic hitmen, the jackals went in, and still do. And they either assassinate the leaders of the country or overthrow them in coups. So two of my clients, Jaime Roldos, democratically elected president of Ecuador, Omar Torrijos, head of state of Panama, both had tremendous integrity. They would not play the game. They would not buy into what I was trying to sell them, to give them, and they were both assassinated. The United States has admitted to taking out Allende of Chile, Arbenz of Guatemala, Mossadegh of Iran, Diem of Vietnam, Lumumba, of many, many, many. And this whole thing that just happened with Berta Cáceres in Honduras dates back to 2009 when the CIA overthrew the democratically elected president of Honduras, President Manuel Zelaya. And replaced him with Lobos, who is a terrible, brutal dictator who's since been replaced by somebody else, and now that country is perhaps the most dangerous in the world. And so this goes on and on. So we have the system of economic hitmen are usually successful at creating this new empire. If not, the jackals go in. If that doesn't work, Saddam Hussein couldn't be taken out by jackals. He had too many look-alike doubles. His security was very good. Same with Gaddafi of Libya. Then the military goes in. And so we've created this global empire, the first truly global empire in history. It's not really an American empire. It's a corporate empire. But the United States government works for the corporations many times. The Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA are all in there working. And in fact, there's this constant flux between people. So, you know, one moment somebody's head of an oil company, and the next moment they're in charge of the regulating body that regulates oil companies, and then they go back to be in charge of an oil company. And the revolving door, it's huge corruption on the highest possible level. It's a sick economy. It's a failed economic system. It's truly a death economy that's killing itself. And just a few statistics that I find particularly disturbing in this regard is we're seeing everything on the planet in deterioration now. We're seeing the ice caps melting, the oceans are rising, climate change is happening, violence and terrorism is on the increase around the world. At the same time, 2.5 billion people live at below the poverty level of $2 a day, and another 2 or 3 billion doing not much better. Meanwhile, a year ago I would have told you 85 individuals have as much wealth as half the world's population. That's not true anymore. It's 62 today. 62 individuals have as much wealth as 3.5 billion people on this planet. 7 out of 10 people live in countries with greater inequality today than 30 years ago. It's gotten worse. This is a disturbing statistic. I'm sorry, I'm going to get to the positive stuff in just a minute. But since the 2008 depression, recession, whatever it was, ended, 1% of the US population has garnered over 90% of all the income that's been generated. 1%, while 95% of us are worse off, relatively speaking. And perhaps the most telling statistic of all of why this is a failed system is that less than 5% of us live in the United States, and we consume almost 30% of the world's resources. Well, half the world is on the verge of starvation, or actually starving. Of that 5%, we know that 1% consumes most. Is that a model? Is that a model? No. China can't do that. China has 19% of the world's population. 5% consuming 30% can't be repeated by China, Brazil, India, Russia, anywhere. It's a failed system. It's a system that's driven by corporate greed. It's a system that is driven by what I call the corporatocracy, a network of people who control our big corporations and governments and the very wealthy people that benefit from that. And it's a system that's driven by one goal, one perceived reality, that the only goal of corporations is to maximize profits, regardless of social and environmental costs. That's a new goal. When I went to business school in the late 60s, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors, but beyond that, takes good care of his employees. A good CEO will not lay anyone off without first taking a cut in salary. Imagine that. And a good CEO takes good care of his clients and his customers and the people who that provide the raw materials for his company, and is a good citizen. A good CEO pays taxes. Last year and for the last 5 years, every year, the most profitable corporations of the Fortune 1000 in the United States have been given $200 billion each year in tax credits. Profitable corporations. They don't pay taxes. I was taught that you pay taxes. And beyond that, you contribute money to the local education system, the recreational facilities, etc. You're a good citizen. That was 1968, 69, 67, 68. In the 70s, that all changed. Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics by saying many things, but the most important thing he said, perhaps devastatingly important, was the only responsibility of corporations is to maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. That gives, and Reagan bought into it, and Thatcher, and every world leader since, including Democratic presidents and Republican presidents in the United States. That's a perceived reality, and it changed. For the first 100 years, the United States was a country. No corporation could get a charter in any state unless it guaranteed that it was going to serve a public interest. There was nothing said about profits. Public interest. Charters lasted on average 10 years, and then the corporation had to go back and prove it had served a public interest and would continue to do so to get another charter. That all changed in the late 1800s when Nelson Rockefeller went to the state of Delaware and said, you know, my oil companies don't want to meet that standard. We're long-term. We can't be stuck with this 10-year thing, and we don't need to prove we serve a public interest. And if you incorporate us in Delaware, we'll pay very high taxes and make sure that every legislator here that votes for us gets a lot of money. They did it. Then he went to New Jersey and did the same thing. And now it's mushroomed. But we have a precedent for a different perceived reality, a different mindset that we really need to look at. This idea that corporations, the only responsibility is to maximize profits, has created insanity. It's created a failed global economic system, a death economy. It's time now for all of us, you and me and all the other hundreds of thousands of people that I've been speaking to around the world, to realize that this is a global problem and we must change it. We must create a life economy, an economy that's based on cleaning up pollution, that's based on regenerating destroyed environments and alleviating the causes of desperation and terrorism across the planet. Imagine if our tax dollars went to pay General Electric and General Motors and General Dynamics, these generals, you know, none of them are called Sergeant. You ever wonder why there's not Sergeant Electric? Anyway, all these generals and Raytheon, the companies that make war machinery, imagine if instead we paid them to come up with systems and technologies for mining all that plastic that's floating around out in the oceans, and for mining all that oil that's in the Amazon and so many other parts of the world. Imagine if we paid big agribusiness companies to, instead of poisoning the earth with chemicals, insecticides, and fertilizers, to instead really come up with organic ways for starving people to grow food more efficiently and store it. And yes, you see, when it happens, the music sings. It's the music of the spheres coming in and say, yes, imagine. Imagine. John Lennon had it right, you know, and imagine a world filled with love. Imagine a world without borders. So just imagine, you know, and imagine if we paid young entrepreneurs and we paid Lockheed Martin and we paid all of our most intelligent corporations, scientists and corporations, to come up with real new technologies for energy that doesn't mine anything ever again, that recycles, for communications and transportation. Yes, we got solar and wind now. We've made some big steps, but there's forms of energy out there just waiting to be invented that nobody's even conceived of yet. So we've got this incredible opportunity, not only an opportunity, but a necessity and a mandate to create this life economy, and to insist that these corporations that we all buy from, so we have the power, so you have the power, and this is what's really exciting right now, is that to understand that although the corporations control the governments, they depend on us to buy their goods and services, invest in them, and support them through our tax dollars and our government policies. These corporations are totally dependent on us. And I have to say that amongst these groups I've spoken to was one of 4,000 CEOs. I was a keynote speaker at a seminar, and another one of a couple of thousand heads of human relations departments. And when I get asked to speak at these events, I call the organizer and say, "You sure you got the right John Perkins?" And I say, "Why would you invite me to speak to these people?" And they'll say, and the response I get is, "Our CEOs are very smart. They know the system isn't working. They don't know how to get out of it. They want some help. They're afraid." And what I hear when I speak at these, usually it's the opening session, and then I hang out for a few days, maybe a week, with these CEOs. And what I hear over and over and over from an awful lot of them is, "I would like to be greener. I've got kids, I've got grandchildren. I'd like for my corporation to do a better job, but I'm afraid that if I lose 0.5% of market share, my main stockholders will fire me. And I'll be replaced by someone who only cares about market share. So they say, you, John Perkins, go out there and tell this audience here at the Strand, tell this audience here at the Strand that what I want is for each and every one of you to send an email and a post, Facebook post and tweets to everybody you know, at least once a week. Pick a corporation. It can be Monsanto, it can be Chevron, Exxon, Nike, Walmart, whoever you want. Pick one. And send emails out to them, to that corporation, but also to all your friends, and ask them to send an email, and ask all their friends to send an email, and say, let's not make any enemies here, okay? They're our friends. So say, hey, corporation, whatever corporation you pick, I love your products. I love you. I want you to succeed, but I'm not going to buy any more ever from you unless you pay your workers in Indonesia a fair wage, clean up the pollution you've created in Ecuador, or whatever the cause is. I'm not going to buy from you until you do whatever it is you want them to do. And when they get enough of these emails, they've got to change. They know that. We've had tremendous success at using the marketplace as a democracy. When I was in college, there was apartheid in South Africa. A small number of people boycotted the companies that supported it, and it ended. The Charles River in Boston, where I went to school, stank so badly that you couldn't walk beside it. There were rivers in Ohio on fire with pollution. The Hudson was terribly pollution. General Electric, Sargent Electric. They've been cleaned up pretty much, with the exception of Flint, I guess. We force corporations to open their doors wider to women and minorities. There's still a lot of work to do in all these directions, but we've made huge progress. They listen. They have to listen. You have the power. We have the power. We, the people, have the power. And so we must get out there. And, you know, when I was with Amy Goodman this morning, we were talking about the debates last night, and there were a lot of points that we could talk about. I mean, both Hillary and Bernie talked a lot about systems that have created by economic hitmen. The system of fossil fuel companies and other big companies financing campaigns, and NAFTA and the free trade agreements, which are all vehicles of the hitmen. But what I said, I think the most important thing for us Americans to recognize is that no matter who the president is, he or she will not have much power, but we do. We have to make it happen. The corporations have the power, and we have the power over the corporations. And corporations are just figments of our imagination. They're just imagined reality, perceived reality, that have been codified into law and have their bylaws and their marching orders, which right now is maximize profits, but we can change that. We must change that. Are you ready to change that? Yes. Are you really ready? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to open this up for questions and discussions in a few moments, but I just want a few things to talk about. What can you individually do? And I think it's pretty obvious. For one, consumer movements are big, important. Do it. It's important what you buy or don't buy, that you're casting a ballot each time you do that, but you also must send those emails. It's not good enough just not to buy a product from a company. You got to let them know why you didn't buy it, because they're doing such and such. Beyond that, this book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, goes into a lot of detail in the end of strategies that each one of us can employ, lists of things that students can do, retired people can do, people between that can do, lots of different things. But I think the most important message of all is for each of you to follow your passions. I know you've all got a passion, and you've got skills. I don't know what each of your passions and skills are. I have a passion for writing, and hopefully some skills in it. Whatever your passion and skills are, go for it. And as long as we each take our own path, but head for the same destination, of converting this death economy into a life economy, we'll get there. I was struck by how, during the Revolutionary War, how fortunate we are that George Washington did not try to write pamphlets. And Tom Paine did not try to lead armies. Paine had a passion and talent for writing pamphlets, and Washington had a passion and talent for leading men. Martha Washington had a passion and talent for organizing women to make clothes for the men at the forefront. They each took a different path, same destination, get out from the British yoke. So we can all take our different paths. And there's so many great organizations too that you can belong to. I've founded a couple of nonprofits. Dream Change, its executive director is here. You'll meet her in a few moments, Samantha Thomas. Dream Change, the Pachamama Alliance, and I know a number of you know of these organizations. If you don't, go to my website, johnperkins.org, and that'll link you to dreamchange.org or pachamama.org. And while you're on my website, please sign up for the newsletter. You actually have to put your email in the little box there. And also, come on one of the trips. I lead groups to the indigenous people of Colombia in December, and to Guatemala, the Mayan people, in January. I'd love to have some of you come. It's exciting, it's fun, it's educational. But the most important thing is to realize that you have the power. You know, when I grew up in New Hampshire, I also had no idea that African Americans in my country had to ride on the back of the bus in some states until Rosa Parks showed me. How many of you know who Rosa Parks was? Well, who the hell was Rosa Parks? She was a woman who did a lot of things, but the most important was she walked to the front of a bus. You can do that. And I had no idea that the DDT that my dad and I were spraying on the swamp behind our house in New Hampshire to kill mosquitoes was also killing fish and birds, until Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring and started a whole environmental movement. How many of you know who Rachel Carson was? Well, who was Rachel Carson? A woman who sat down at a tiny desk in a small house in Pennsylvania with a scrap of paper and a pencil and started writing a book, having no idea that it would ever get published, much less change the world. You can do that. And how many of you have ever heard of Richard Davis or Jack Woodbury or Mrs. Schneier? Wow. New York. But you're educated. Well, Jack and Richard were my high school English and history teacher. A trick question. And Mrs. Schneier was my third grade teacher. If it weren't for those three individuals, I wouldn't be standing here. I would never have written a book. Jack and Richard taught me the power of the pen. It's more powerful than armies. That's how we change perceived reality. And that's what got me into being a writer. Mrs. Schneier, in third grade, there was a bully in my class. Third grade, he was 15 years old. He didn't like me, pushed me around on the playground. I'd go running to Mrs. Schneier, and she'd say, you know, she didn't know what to do, because in New Hampshire you had to stay in school till you were 16. And then one day she said to me, "Johnny, you're just going to have to take care of this yourself." And I said, "But he's big." And she said, "Well, here's my suggestion. Next time he pushes you, you just haul off and kick him in the shins and run like hell." I don't think she used the H word. I did. And a funny thing happened. He whimpered, and then he became my friend, my ally, my protector. And I learned how to deal with a bully. So right now we got a bully system out there, a death economy run by these corporations. We got to kick it in the shins. We got to deal with it. You ready to do that? Yes. Okay, are you really ready? Yes. All right, so I'm going to close this part of the talk and with a quote, if I can find it, which is quite old, but very relevant, I think. So this is a quote, December 1776, Tom Paine. This is just one of these key moments when we're changing perceived reality. Paine writes, These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he or she who stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. A generous parent should say, if there must be trouble, let it be in my time. Let it be in my day, that my child may have peace. If there must be trouble, let it be in our day, that our children may have peace. And Paine goes on to say, I love the man or woman who can smile in trouble, who can gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious future. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious future. I think that's why we're all here tonight, so that when my 8-year-old grandson is my age, a few years from now, he'll look back and say, thank God all those people came together at the Strand and committed to turning a death economy into a life economy, committed to creating a world that I, Grant, am happy to inherit. Thank God you're all here. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to taking this journey with you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you.
I think we have time for a couple questions, if that's all right.
Great, sure.
So if you just raise your hand, I'll bring
The
the mic.
questions from this side of the room and the answers from over here. You're going to hand out the microphone to just whoever you...
I think we've got a little bit of a crowd if you want to choose a couple.
Okay.
Before I ask a question, if I go on these trips, whether you do have to eat bugs? No, the question is, I guess I hear contradictory information. On one hand, it sounds like no matter who you elect, whether it's Cruz or Bernie Sanders, it's going to be the same outcome. But then you're giving us a sense of hope. I was wondering, could you maybe be a little bit more clear on the futility or the importance of this election?
Yeah, thank you. We eat very well on the trips, incidentally. You know, it's important to vote. And I think whoever the next president is will send a very strong message to the world. It's symbolically important. But what concerns me is this circus that we've been going through for how many months now? How many years? You know, and it's a distraction that, you know, it's very cheap for television to cover these things, and a lot of people watch. And then we all sort of think, well, if my person just gets elected, that's all I have to do. And we saw this very clearly with Obama, that there was huge excitement amongst Obama supporters before he was elected, but after he was elected, they all kind of went away and said, okay, let him do the job. And he has tremendous pressure not to do the job. The president and all of our leaders are very, very vulnerable. You know, once you get in that Oval Office, you read the Riot Act. You know, Mr. President, you know, you can do a few things, but watch yourself, be careful. And I think what we know now is that presidents can be assassinated without bullets. Personal assassination, character assassination, political assassination. Clinton was politically assassinated. He was impeached. In Kennedy's day, you had to use a gun because nobody really cared that he was having affairs with all kinds of women. But by the time Clinton came around, you know, a sex scandal could bring him down. You know, who doesn't have skeletons in their closet? And even if you don't have skeletons in your closet, the FBI can create them with the internet and so on, the way it is today. So everybody in a high position today knows that they're very vulnerable. That again is why we the people have to do it. And when you think about it, that's what democracy is all about. You know, we can't just elect somebody and say, let him or her do it. We the people have to do it. Vote, but think of it as a relatively small, fun act, a nice thing to do, a participatory thing, and then go out and take an action every day to support whatever it was that caused you to vote for that person. What was the most important part of that person's platform that you really related to personally, your passion, and then commit to taking action every single day. Whether it's just sending an email or going out and demonstrating in the streets and getting put in prison, whatever. Something very simple, sending an email, something rather complex, something in between. But commit every single day to acting to back up whatever it is that whoever it is you voted for. That way we'll get there. Thanks. She's calling the shots. Nancy's calling the shots.
Yeah, sure. I wanted to thank you, first of all, for coming here, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the processes and reasons about how the economic hitman system has been domesticated and internalized in the U.S. and not just in the developing world.
Thank you. So, yeah, can you hear with this microphone? It seems a little different to me, but so today's economic hitmen are Wall Street moguls, bankers, people who enslave other people through the debt that's tied into student loans, credit cards, the healthcare system, and so many other things, and also who cheat and commit crimes such as rigging LIBOR and the exchange rate and other banking schemes and never get punished for it, never get indicted. 6 major world banks just admitted to committing crimes, and they've paid $15 billion in retribution, but not a single banker was indicted. Now I ask you, do banks commit crimes? No. People in banks commit crimes. The banks paid the fines, nobody got indicted. Those are economic hitmen. Our politicians have become economic hitmen, so they accept, huge amounts of money in campaigns to finance their campaigns. And they also know that they're going to get very lucrative lobbying jobs, many of them, if they decide not to run or if they lose the election. Senator Dodd, Democratic senator from Connecticut, is a very good example of that. He was from Connecticut, right? Okay, he was chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, and accepted huge amounts of money from the financial services industry when he was running. That's disgraceful. That's disgusting. So we've got these politicians that become economic hitmen, essentially, and we've got people like me still doing that work. Then every single corporation out there, the big ones, all have their version of economic hitmen. They're out working deals like what happened in Flint. They're working deals in my state of Washington, where I live. Boeing just got a huge tax rate to stay in the state, done by economic hitmen. They're constantly working deals so that they don't pay taxes. They use all the highways, the airports, the electric utilities, the schools, the police departments, the fire departments, and they don't pay a penny for them because their economic hitmen are out there convincing state governments to compete with each other to get these industries and doing the same thing on an international level with country governments. So we've got this whole array of economic hitmen out there that have just taken over. I mean, during my day, it was fairly simple. We were working to try to take over developing countries, get resources from developing countries. Today, they're mining us, and Europe, Greece. In the New Confessions of an Economic Hitman, there's a wonderful endorsement by the former finance minister of Greece, Yanis, who's been through this process. Ireland, so much of Europe has just been hit so strongly. They've really taken us. Debt, fear, militarization, the idea that they are the problem and all we got to do is spend enough money to somehow defeat them. Used to be communists, now it's Muslims, it's terrorists, it's immigrants, it's them. The problem's out there. It's, that's the problem. So that's the short version. I go into a lot more detail in the book about today's economic hitmen and name names and so on and so forth. So, but that's the kind of the Cliff Notes version. Thanks.
Hi, do you think you could comment a little bit about the power of corporations, PR, and communications on this issue of climate change sustainability? Because we're hearing a lot about companies saying they're beyond petroleum, for example. And I think people want to believe that, companies are becoming sustainable. We really don't have to worry so much because now they've got religion. But at the same time, we find out that in many cases, that's not true. We hear about a company like Apple that says now they're monitoring their factories around the world, but in fact, they're only obligated through initiatives that they participate in to inspect one factory a year. So it'll be 17 years before they're actually required to go back and visit the factory where they had over 15 suicides in the early 2000s. So could you say a little bit about the power of grassroots mobilization and participating in popular movements as opposed to relying on companies with this whole greening of the economy and sustainability language they're using?
Yeah, thank you. That's a whole book right there. and I wanted to also go back to also the jackals have taken over here. We know the police state, the drones, and so on. There's a lot in the book about how the jackals have taken over too. So, yeah, advertising, the media. I mean, we know that the mainstream media today is at best it's entertainment. At worst, it's pure propaganda. They sell us this line of good. It's so important that we expose that. I think this is a great thing for you to do. Get out there, get on the internet, form a movement to really expose Apple, and also support Apple in their fight against the FBI right now. We need to support Apple in that one. But yeah, I hear you. This whole media thing is so huge. And I was going to ask Samantha Thomas, who's the executive director of Dream Change, to pass around Samantha, would you stand up for a minute? So Samantha's the executive director of a nonprofit I founded, Dream Change, and she's going to be passing around a little base. My publisher sent a gift that we're going to raffle. So if you have a business card or want to put your name and email address and put it in there, we'll do a drawing right at the end here for this beautiful gift from my publisher. Oh my, it's so incredible. But the one reason I bring that up is because Samantha organized last summer something called the Love Conference in Portland, Oregon. The Love Summit, sorry. And it was hosted by Dan Wyden and me. And Dan Wyden, so there's a company called Wyden Kennedy, which is the world's largest privately owned advertising company. That's why I'm getting back to this. And Dan himself came up with Just Do It. Nike, they are Nike's advertising company. They're Chrysler's, they're PepsiCo, there are a lot of big companies out there. Dan is in the process of retiring. He wants to change the world. And he knows that you can do this through advertising to a certain degree if he can advertise the right way. But one of the things that we organized this, Samantha organized this Love Summit to appeal to business executives. We brought in a lot of business executives. We held it at Dan's headquarters, Wyden Kennedy, this beautiful, incredible office building in downtown Seattle. And the nature of this was to let corporations know that all advertising is about really is trying to get people to love you and your product, a company and its product. So even the deception that you mentioned with Apple, that's because they want you to love you, to love them, and not know that they're doing this kind of underhanded thing. But we can use advertising the other way. And so the real secret here is how so if we talk about the life economy, we could also call it a love economy or a peace economy, and to move into the sense, so in one of the chapters of the book I talk extensively about this and open with Samantha actually quoting at the beginning of the Love Summit John Lennon, talking about, there's all you need is love, and imagine a world of peace, imagine a world without borders, and so on and so forth. So advertising has this incredibly strong impact on us today. But if we understand this and can turn it around and also understand that the mainstream media doesn't mean much a lot. Confessions of an Economic Hitman spent almost a year and a half on the New York Times bestseller list, and the New York Times never reviewed it. That was hysterical. It was historical and hysterical. Never been done before, that a book would spend that much time and they wouldn't review it because their advertisers didn't like it. And in the end, they went in a business section, they did totally vet it and gave it their seal of approval. But despite that fact, it kept growing in sales and so on because we have such a strong alternative media. And that's a form of advertising. Facebook, we can use that. We don't have to use it for trivial things. We can do that too. But to really get out there and understand what I'm talking about here is let's advertise for a life economy. Let's let these corporations know that it doesn't matter what they tell us about how great their products are, that if they're not committed to creating a life economy, to cleaning up polluted areas, regenerating destroyed environments, and alleviating the causes of desperation in the world, we're not going to buy from them. I'm kind of going on here, but there's a lot more to that in the book, too. I'm sorry I kind of rambled here. I want to give time for somebody else, but that's, again, the short version.
Just last question, then.
Okay. Your choice.
Okay. We'll get this gentleman up.
I heard you on Gary on Friday. I enjoyed you, Gary Knoll. I have two questions I'd like to ask you. Number one, I believe that there's a strong effort being made to radically reduce the world's population. What do you think about that?
What's the second question?
The second question is, what was your involvement in the Hugo Chavez overthrow?
Well, the second one is particularly easy. I had no involvement whatsoever. I've been totally out of that business for a long time. But Hugo Chavez changed history by not being overthrown, by standing up to the CIA. And after that, 10 countries in Latin America democratically voted in progressive presidents. And before that, every one of those 10 countries during most of my lifetime had been under the powers of a brutal dictator, usually put into power by the CIA. So Chavez, whatever you think of Chavez as a leader, and I don't think he was a great leader by any means, but he did change history. I'm not putting my seal of approval on Chavez, but he changed history for the positive, and I had nothing to do with his overthrow or his rescue from that. The population issue, I don't have any inside information on that at all. I know that's a prevalent theory out there, but I don't know. But what I will say is, obviously, the Earth has a limit as to how many people we can tolerate on this planet. But that isn't, at this point, that's not the real issue. If you consider that less than 5% of us consume 30% of the world's resources, there's plenty of resources to go around. They're just not being distributed properly. And of that 5%, 1% controls most of them. So we really don't have as a global thing, a population problem. We do locally in many places. Many countries have that problem. But there's a huge distribution problem, and it's this perceived reality. And again, we do need to look at population. Obviously, there's a limit someplace here, and we don't really know what the limit is. But whatever the population is, we have it today. We need to slow it down, and we need to learn how to take care of the people that are on this planet at this point in time. So that was the last question, I think. So I'd just like to end once again by thanking this bookstore. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, your family. Thank you.
Thank you, John.